Welcome to the Siwike podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The Siwike podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Siwike Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here with one of our new guest hosts. He is now Kwame Fraser, previously known as Scott. So Kwame, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Good to see you, Lukey.
Awesome. So it was an interesting way that we had this conversation. So I had recently done a post on changing my name. So I am Luki Danu Cariento, but a lot of the different online assets I go by Luki Danu, just to make things easy. Like nobody wants to type in 12 letters, or they can just type in 4, right? But the moment when I changed my name, like Luki Danu, something felt off. Something didn't feel right. And then when I made the change, like I actually got a couple of messages. Hey, Luki, you okay? Like, what happened? You kind of changed your name. And then from that, it kind of sparked a whole bunch of different conversations. So I decided to change my name back. And then I was looking it on LinkedIn, and I saw this new connection that I had, Kwame Fraser, and apparently it's not a new connection. It's someone that I knew before. So I want to kind of engage in a discussion about kind of the name change, and then ultimately one talking about like authenticity and being your authentic self. So I'd love Scott, Kwame, however we can kind of go through a little bit of the backstory, and I'd love to hear a little bit about how you decided to go back or go forward or whatever into kind of your more authentic self.
Yeah, well, it's been an interesting year because I made the decision to start going by Kwame this summer. And I guess it wasn't didn't do it on a whim. I've been workshopping it with some of my black friends for a while now. And so I've been thinking about it for a long time, thinking about my relationship to my name, my birth name, Scott. That still remains it's what's on my driver's license. I haven't gotten around to legally changing my name, and it's not like I have any problem with the name Scott at all. It just didn't sit right with me. I remember even as a kid coming back. It was in elementary school. And I came home one day, and I told my mother, who I'm sure was devastated to hear this, that I didn't like my name. And so she was a little upset by that, but she humored me, and she said, "Well, what do you think you would like your name to be?" And I didn't know. I hadn't really thought of the second part of that, the implied question. As just knew that I wasn't really feeling Scott. And she made some recommendations based on my middle name, which is Alexander, and none of those really really worked or felt right for me. But then, if anyone who heard our previous conversation might remember that I was in the military, and then I was just Fraser, right? I mean, so I've kind of had this kind of shifting identity for a while, or this kind of questions about my personal nomenclature for a while. And this year, I think I finally made the decision to, I guess you can call it a rebranding. I feel like I'm still the same person substantively. I still behave more or less the same way. But I think what I'm observing is that people respond to the name Kwame differently than they did Scott.
For sure, and I know my story is slightly different, but similar in the sense that, well, my birth name was the strange name, was Luki. It's not Luke, or it's not Lucky. It's Luki, right? And a lot of people are like, "Oh, is that like a nickname or something?" It's like, "No, that's my actual name." Oh, and hopefully he's not reacting to the name. But I had a similar thing where I wanted a different name too, but unlike you, I actually had a thought where I wanted a kind of a quote unquote normal name. I wanted like a Michael, a Patrick, a Kevin, like one of those things. Like being a newcomer, an immigrant, I wanted kind of a westernized type of name, right? But then they said no. you got to keep your name. So I went on it, but it was interesting because I never went by Luke. I would always go by Lukey, right? And then it slowly, I guess I got acclimatized to it, and now I love it. It's just a good, interesting talking point that I can have conversations with people in it, and I've never changed my name, and for me it was that last name that was an interesting point that kind of hit home for me. So that's kind of a similarly different one. But I'd love if you can walk us through a little bit more about that thinking process, right? So obviously it started as a kid, and it was incubated there, and in the military, you're Fraser, right? So shifting identity, and then how does one lead from kind of that shifting identity to start making kind of the decision over the summer to change your name to Kwame? So like, what are some of the things that you thought about, what was going on in your head, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, it's interesting because you talked about in your family, keeping your name, and as a child maybe wanting to make yourself more invisible or less stand out less, right?
Yes.
As an immigrant kid. Now I'm the son of an immigrant from Jamaica, and I think I also wanted to be invisible, and I think
Mm.
that the name Scott Fraser, at least on paper, really made me invisible. And so what started to change was my willingness to continue being invisible.
Mm.
And especially in my line of work where I'm working in an industry, the publishing industry, where there simply aren't that many black professionals working in this sector.
Mm.
And by taking an obviously African, specifically West African name, I feel like I'm becoming more visibly available to black writers who may not have ever felt safe submitting their work or supported in sending their work. So this is really a reverse of that childhood desire to be
Mm.
invisible, where all I wanted was to fit in, so that it's just easier, right? I mean, it's hard being the standout, especially around if it's around a racial or ethnic trait that is not always popular in the playground, right? I mean,
Mm.
I think what's happened is as I've entered my 40s, I certainly have the desire and the confidence to be far more visible and to take up some space.
For sure. I think part of it goes back to that confidence thing because, well, growing up, I kind of share the same sentiment where you're trying to kind of be invisible and you don't really want to stick out from the crowd, right? There's that sentiment like the tall poppy syndrome where like the tall poppy gets kind of cut or something to that effect, right? But I do find that when you get older, you come into a little bit more of your confidence. Maybe because you've been around and you've experienced so much that you're like, none of that stuff really matters. And then you realize, okay, what do I really want to stand out for? What are those values? What are those things that I want to embody? Are definitely some things that I often consider myself. And being proud of my strange, often time-consuming name because it is quite long to include and write out. But definitely embracing that part of it. And I'd love if you share a little bit on like kind of again the decision process. Again, you had to evaluate like that authenticity of yourself. So when we were first kind of talking about this episode, we talked about your being your authentic self. So it sounds like that as you're adopting this new identity, you're more aligned with your authentic self. And as I was looking into the dictionary definition, like authenticity or being authentic is undisputed in origin, genuine, and then apparently an existential philosophy. So they have something in that. It's relating to or denoting an emotionally appropriate, significant, purposive, and responsible mode of human life. So that probably needs a philosophy degree to dissect that sort of thing. But what I took from that is basically again it's being who you are at your core. And I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit about like your authentic self and kind of the name change and all that sort of stuff. And what does that mean for you?
Well, it's your lucky day because I'm fairly well versed in existential thought, so I
There you
can pull
go.
that thread. And the basic idea of existential thought it can be boiled down to the phrase existence precedes essence. So you
Okay.
exist, and then it's up to you to sort of figure out what the essence of your life is going to be.
Okay.
So just to pull that thread, uh, um, uh, when I changing my name, or changing this part of the way I talk about myself, in a way I've made a conscious decision to edit my essence. I'm not saying I threw out everything that preceded this change. I regard it as at the end of the day, it's a fairly small thing for one person to make a relatively small change to their personal nomenclature. But for me, it's yeah, I've made an edit to my essence, and a conscious choice, right? And by doing that, I'm taking some certain responsibilities. I think existential philosophers would always say that it's our duty, it's our responsibility to make those conscious choices about what our essence is all about, as opposed to sort of passively doing it like a cork being tossed around on the sea. We're we're piloting our own ship. We're under our own power, and we can make those conscious choices.
That's amazing, and it reminds me of something that I would work with other folks in the career coaching side, where oftentimes people, when they're trying to find like their purpose and fulfillment, whatever, they want to find kind of their north star, like where it is they're heading to. But for me, it's less about the direction and where you're going, and more, are you the one steering the ship? So I love what you said about kind of that conscious choice. And I actually find that choice more and more is becoming that thing that differentiates folks, right? People who can actually consciously and proactively choose whatever it is. Because a lot of things are, but a lot of things are also up to us to decide based on a conscious choice. So I love that. Even something as kind of like, it's your name, right? Why bother? But at the same time, no, I want to make this change because it signifies all these different things to the outside world, and probably to the internal world as well, as you did. Because when you go around and introducing yourself, with kind of this new identity, there is, I guess, a new um, essence that's now be projected into the world. So I found that super fascinating. I'd love if you talk to us a little bit more about like the name, because well, I have two kids, and when we had to choose the name, we kind of had our own process. But when you choose your own name, I think that's a little bit more interesting one, because when you choose it for a kid, like you get it, then that's what your mom and dad called you. But for yourself, that must be a more of a personal kind of decision. I'd love if you walk us through that process, because
Well,
there's a multitude of out there, ethnic or
yeah,
otherwise, right?
yeah. So the first thing I wanted to choose a name that was unambiguously African,
Mm.
and then I decided that uh, I would like to focus specifically on West Africa, and really for no. I chose an Akan name, which means they have a series of names that are allocated based on the day of the week that you're born.
Okay.
So Kwame simply translates to born on a male born on a Saturday.
Okay.
So it's literally, it's a literal, quite a literal meaning. And I was a lad born on a Saturday, so
Okay.
so it fits. And as best as we can tell, through my father did one of those DNA, where are you from kind of
Mm.
DNA tests, and
Right.
in particular for people from the African diaspora in the Americas. Sometimes it's really hard to know for historical reasons. You can't be too specific, and that's not our fault. But as best as we can tell, my father's family originated somewhere, probably either in Benin or Ghana, contemporary Benin or Ghana, and the Akan people have had a big influence on got one of the major peoples of Ghana, and I just kind of like I like the naming convention. I'm sure there's probably some purists who would say that I might be, maybe took the name without blessing or whatever. But Kwame has also become a fairly popular name within the diaspora as well. So
Mm,
you'll see African Americans with the name Kwame or Kwame. Remember when I was a kid, there was a basketball player named Kwame Brown,
mm,
who was a big fella who played a few seasons in the NBA. So this kind of deliberate reclamation of an African tradition, African heritage, I think is just going to become more common, and I think it's good for people in my kind of position to normalize and popularize African names.
for sure, and provides that visibility. And it sounds like there was a whole bunch of kind of that reconnection with yourself, right? Because you had to kind of go through the history, DNA tests, notwithstanding, and to figure out like day, the months, and things like what is appropriate based on your particular circumstance. And yeah, I mean, if you feel that is the new you, or I guess you all along, that would be an interesting one. So I would love you to chat a little bit about kind of like if someone calls you Scott, well, because I'm guessing that's going to happen, and in any amount of time. So what are your thoughts, or what's your approach to kind of dealing with that situation? Is it a big deal? Is it challenging, or is it just like
Yeah, no,
they haven't noticed yet?
to me, it's just like it's not like I took out a press release or anything, right? Like it's people have known me for 41 now. Some people have known me for 42 years as of today.
Yeah.
That as by one name, it's going to be really hard, and like even my own family, right? It's like my mother, my sisters, my father, like. I don't expect them to be able to make that adjustment uh, uh, just because it's been something that I could make the switch myself. I
Hmm.
still sometimes forget, and it's the funniest thing when uh, uh, sometimes I make the mistake and I'm like, oh wait, but call me this. Like I said, my name's Scott, but oh wait, no, call me. uh,
Yeah.
um, so it's a new thing, so it would be kind of I can't get upset about it. And the great thing about so we do so much business by email now. And so it was easy for, we just a couple keystrokes I had a new email address,
Right.
and when we just had the old one forward to it automatically. So when people email me, I just reply. If they address me as Scott, I don't acknowledge it. I just reply and say all my best, Kwame, and that's
Yeah.
usually the end of it. And then they make the switch on their own, right? And most of
Right.
the times I don't really have to say anything other than points it out, and I generally assume that most people are going to go out of their way to respect my choice. I mean,
For
it's
sure.
usually pretty, people who don't are going to make themselves pretty irrelevant to my life over time, right? Like it's like if someone persistently wanted to call you Luke or whatever, it's like maybe it doesn't bother you, but I imagine that eventually you'd be like, dude, my name's Lukey.
Yeah, for me, I'm not a big stickler on those types of things. I know some people have, but obviously yours is a very purposeful name change. I know someone who is Michael, not Mike, right? And
Right,
he
right.
definitely abhors people calling him Mike, because that is very specifically him. And I mean, I care a little as long as you engage in a conversation and you do it respectfully. I'm okay with that. But I mean, I guess I can see your point. If they constantly called me something else, it
Yeah.
might be good to remind. Like if I constantly reminded them and say it's actually Lukey, and then they did it again, and regardless, well, we'll
Eventually, it's becoming a deliberate. They're winding you up, right? It's
exactly that sort of thing. But I'm generally quite forgiving.
yeah.
As we start to close off the discussion, I'd love for you to share a little bit on like kind of you embracing your authentic self, right? So obviously the name change is part of it, and it's sparking probably hopefully a whole bunch of new conversations with folks as well. But can you talk a little bit about more of how you have been continuing to embrace your authentic self through the name change and through other things as well?
Yeah, well, one of the major ways, and I'm going to say this is entirely possible because I'm a person with a fair amount of privilege, but I've been able to spend time in Jamaica over the last couple of years, and spend some time really kind of getting to know some of the places that were important to my father's family. I just returned from a trip where I was able to kind of interview my cousin who's in his early 70s now, and really get some information that it's the kind of things that your grandparents or your parents wouldn't necessarily tell you even as an adult child, because they still see you as sort of, like leave those questions unanswered or unasked preferably. But it was really neat for me to kind of hear his recollections about the family, about my grandparents, and about my father and my uncle, and so it's kind of embracing that in a more serious way. But I would say it's almost what I wanted to say. Rather than just kind of saying, I'm privileged, I can do whatever I want now or whatever. I would say it's almost Maslowian, right? Like I couldn't really spend the time and resources mining this part of myself until I had sort of more basic needs met. And so I think that's kind of, it's love the fact that this programming is all about navigating this personal and professional questions that so many of us have. But I really had to get to a point where some of my more basic needs were met, and then my true essence, my true identity was able to reveal itself. But it wasn't until I felt relatively secure. And I think that's probably an entire other podcast episode, is what does security mean. But when I finally felt physically secure, emotionally secure, financially secure, all of a sudden this essence that has probably always been part of me was allowed to find expression. And so being able to have that, and to have spent some time, like I said, really engaging seriously with my family tree, has been really, it's been a pleasure and a delight.
That's amazing. Yeah, and chalk another one up to Mr. Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. And you're absolutely right. Where for those of us who are kind of on the lower rung, looking for security, whatever security means for us, then at some point, hopefully you don't get on and stay on kind of like the hamster wheel of life and just kind of continue build. You take time to actually look at relationships and all that self-actualization, and focus ideally on the relationship with yourself. I think is super important, which I think I'm really happy that you were able to do. And it's also a reminder for myself is I actually had a thought in the back of my head to do like podcast episodes with my family, and almost like chronicling like the family tree and stuff like that, because I have conversations with interesting people around me, but I would hope that my own family is interesting to me, at least, right? And those might not be published or whatever, but at least it's something there. And hopefully I'll have more of those conversations and learn a little bit more about myself, and really embrace kind of what or whoever my authentic self is. So thanks so much, Kwame, for joining us in this conversation and sharing your story. And are there any kind of parting words that you'd want to share with folks as they try to embrace their authentic selves?
I genealogy is important. I think we do need to know where we come from. It's harder for some of us than others, especially, there's all kinds of obstacles to it, but being able to at least know your story, tell your story, and do some ancestor work. It's we get too busy, I think, in the West to really think about where we came from. And for me, that's you mentioned the phrase the North Star. Well, I think unless you have the sort of back trail, you can still find yourself going off course, if you have to know where you're coming from. So yeah, I mean, I think it's good. It's good work to do. It's good self work. It's good family work, and yeah, go for it. Do it.
Sounds good. So thanks so much, Kwame, for being on this episode, and hopefully we'll have you back for a future episode.
Well, I'd love to. I had a great time, and thank you so much.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us on the Siwike Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Lukidanu, Lukidanu, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.